The most abhorrent practice in human history is probably slavery. The only exception in cruelness is murder. But to own a human being is to deprive a human being of its basic human rights. And whenever slavery occurred, there occurred slave rebellions because slaves did not want to be property of other human beings. And whenever a slave rebellion happened, the slaves would be punished mercilessly by their masters. You had the rebellion at Amstatt during the 19th century, during the debate about abolishing slavery in the United States of America. A group of slaves took control over a Spanish ship that wanted to sell slaves illegally to Cuba and avoid patrols that wanted to capture slave traders and punish them. One Swedish ship was found carrying slaves one time, and they were fined and forced to return the slaves to Africa when they found the Swedish ship selling slaves illegally. To own slaves was a part of every culture in human history until the 19th century, when the practice started to be questioned and the idea of freeing slaves became a universal idea. And Christianity played a big part in abolishing slavery, since Christian males cannot be held for slavery longer than 7 years, according to the Bible, or how they interpreted the Bible. There are passages in the Bible that support slavery and passages that seems to oppose slavery as a practice. You had the famous Spartacus rebellion in the Roman Empire, where slaves rebelled against their masters. But did you know that Sweden also had a slave rebellion during the 16th century, according to legend? The slave of Eofor, that was in control over the Swedish treasury, together with other slaves, revolted against slavery and defeated the Swedish army in 8 battles. The Swedish king tried to resist the slave Eofor or Tuni in defeating the slaves and returning them to slavery, but according to legend, Eofor managed to defeat the Swedish king and the slaves were freed. The Swedes were forced to call in Danish help to defeat the slaves in Sweden, but the thralls had already made an alliance with the Geats, and that was enough for Eofor or Tuni, the slave, to stab Ogenitov in the head with his sword, so it penetrated his helmet and blood came out. According to legend, it's described as a boar penetrating his helmet. But that's just a name for Eofor. The slaves aided the Geatish king during a Swedish siege, and as a reward for slaying the rival's king, the Geats king Hygelac gave Eofor his daughter as a reward for aiding them in battle and defeating the Swedes. The practice of slavery did occur in Viking society. This is of course just a legend, but it's an interesting legend nonetheless, because humans will always seek freedom from tyranny and being abused or mistreated by their owners. Here is a Swedish Vendel helmet, and the fact that Sweden had such a rich history is often forgotten by our historians in an attempt to diminish our history in front of Russian or Danish historians that have a more nationalist agenda. But nonetheless, the slaves did revolt, and they managed to win their freedom. And the plot is something similar to Django Unchained. Django Unchained by Quentin Tarantino. It's a legend, so it doesn't have to be true. But I like the idea that slaves fought for their freedom and received freedom by slaying their masters in battle. It's something poetic about justice. To own a human being is universally wrong, because or use them as laborers.